Elena stood at the edge of their farmhouse porch, watching the dust swirl in the wake of Daniel's truck as it disappeared down the gravel road. Another long day apart. Another morning of waking up alone, spending hours in a quiet house, waiting for the sound of his return. She knew he was working hard for them, commuting to the city for a demanding job that kept their life stable. But knowing didn't make the silence any easier to bear. She sighed, wrapping her arms around herself as the breeze carried the scent of fresh hay from the stables. The wide, open fields surrounding their homes stretched endlessly, but instead of feeling free, she felt trapped in the stillness, in the solitude. Needing a distraction, she wandered toward the stables. She rarely spent much time there. Daniel was the one who loved the horses. But as she stepped inside, the scent of leather and earth filled her senses, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Midnight, their black stallion, stood in a stall, watching her with deep, knowing eyes. There was something about the way he looked at her, as if he understood the emptiness she carried. "Hey there," she murmured, stepping closer. Midnight's ears flicked forward, and he nickered softly. She reached out a tentative hand, running her fingers through his silky mane. It had been a long time since she had touched him like this, not just in passing but with intention. A warmth spread through her fingertips, as if the horse was absorbing her loneliness, offering something in return. "I miss him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish he didn't have to be away so much." Midnight nudged her shoulder, and she let out a small laugh, surprised at the comfort in such a simple gesture. The moment lingered, stretching beyond words. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a quiet companionship. It was strange, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it, her heart skipping when she saw Daniel's name. "Hey," she answered, trying to steady her voice. "I just wanted to call," he said, sounding almost hesitant. "I know we haven't talked much during the day. Thought maybe you'd like to hear my voice." Elena sat up, pressing the phone closer to her ear. "I really would." They talked for nearly an hour, about nothing and everything. When she finally hung up, her heart felt lighter. She glanced out the window toward the stables, where Midnight stood silhouetted in the moonlight. Coincidence, she told herself. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Days passed, and Elena found herself drawn to the stables more often. Midnight had become more than just a horse. He was a presence, a quiet listener, a source of comfort she hadn't known she needed. Every morning, after Daniel left for work, she would find herself lingering by his stall, whispering thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud to anyone. "I wish Daniel would come home earlier." That evening, Daniel walked through the door just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He dropped his keys on the counter, looking surprised himself. "Traffic was weirdly light today," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Felt like the universe wanted me home." Elena stiffened slightly, but smiled. Just a coincidence, surely. But then it happened again. And again. Each time she spoke her heart's wishes to Midnight, reality seemed to bend. Small things at first. Daniel sending her a text during lunch, unexpected flowers on the table. But soon, the shifts became undeniable. One afternoon, she stroked Midnight's mane and murmured, "I wish Daniel would take a day off." The next morning, Daniel announced he had been granted a surprise leave. Elena's heart pounded. The logical part of her told her it was luck, but deep down, she felt the truth settling in. Midnight was listening, and somehow, he was making her wishes come true. At first, it thrilled her. It was like a secret only they shared, a quiet magic between them. But as time passed, she couldn't ignore a new unease creeping in. Daniel noticed it too. "You seem different," he said one evening as they sat on the porch. His eyes searched hers, a quiet concern behind them. "Lighter, somehow. Happier." "I am," Elena admitted, though she hesitated. Should she tell him? Would he believe her? Daniel smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I like seeing you like this. I hope I'm part of the reason." Her heart twisted. Of course he was. Wasn't he? The next morning, she stood by Midnight's stall, her fingers gripping the wooden rail. I don't want to rely on this, she whispered. I just want him to see me again. To miss me like I miss him. Midnight nickered, pressing his nose to her palm. A deep warmth spread through her chest, and she exhaled, feeling lighter. That night, Daniel reached for her first, pulling her close in a way he hadn't in months. I've been thinking about us, he murmured. I don't want work to pull me away so much. Elena's breath caught. Had Midnight done this, too? Or was this real? She swallowed, uncertainty curling in her stomach. What if she was changing things that weren't meant to be changed? As Midnight watched her, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight, she realized she wasn't sure where the magic ended or if it ever would. Elena's heart raced as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was asleep beside her, his breathing deep and steady, but she was wide awake. The warmth of his touch earlier had felt so real, so natural, but doubt gnawed at her. Had he reached for her because he wanted to, or because she had wished for it? She slipped out of bed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders as she made her way outside. The night was cool, the air thick with a scent of damp earth. A soft glow from the stable lantern cast shadows along the wooden beams, and there, standing tall and silent, was Midnight. His dark eyes met hers, as if he had been waiting. Elena hesitated before stepping closer, her fingers curling around the smooth wood of the stall door. Midnight, she whispered. What are you? The horse remained still, his gaze unwavering. The silence pressed against her, heavier than before. Swallowing hard, she reached out and ran a trembling hand along his mane. I don't know what's real anymore, she admitted. I wanted Daniel to love me, to see me again. But what if I took away his choice? Midnight's nostrils flared, and a strange warmth spread through her fingertips. A deep, almost knowing look flickered in his eyes. Elena's chest tightened. The truth had been there all along, hadn't it? Midnight had given her what she asked for. But at what cost? The next morning, she watched Daniel closely. He smiled at her over breakfast, his touch lingering on her wrist as he passed her a cup of coffee. It should have made her happy. Instead, her stomach twisted. I was thinking, Daniel said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Maybe I should take more time off. Maybe we should slow down a little. Just focus on us. It was everything she had wanted to hear. But it didn't feel like his words. It felt like an echo of her own wishes. Elena set her cup down carefully. And you really want that? Daniel frowned, tilting his head. Of course I do. Then, after a pause, why would you even ask that? She opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she explain? That night, she returned to the stables, her heart heavy. Midnight stood waiting, as always. I don't want to force love, she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. I just want it to be real. A soft exhale from Midnight, warm and steady. Elena stepped back, her decision made. She would not wish again. If Daniel loved her, if he truly wanted to be with her, it had to be, because he chose to. For the first time in weeks, she walked back to the house without looking back. Elena didn't return to the stables the next morning. Instead, she busied herself with things she had long neglected, reading a book on the porch, tending to the garden, writing in her journal. She had spent so much time chasing what she thought was missing that she had forgotten who she was outside of her loneliness. Midnight watched her from the paddock, his dark eyes calm, unreadable. A part of her ached to go to him, to press her worries into his sleek coat and let him make them disappear. But she held back. If she wanted her love with Daniel to be real, she had to step away from the magic. The real test came that evening. Daniel arrived home late, his tie loosened, exhaustion lining his face. Elena braced herself, unsure what to expect now that she had stopped making wishes. Would he drift away again? Would the distance return? Long day, she asked gently. Daniel nodded, rubbing a hand over his face before looking at her. Yeah, but I kept thinking about you. I missed you today. Elena's breath hitched. The words were simple, but this time, she knew they were his. Not shaped by a whispered wish, not pulled from the universe by unseen forces, just real, unprompted longing. She smiled, stepping forward to wrap her arms around him. I missed you too. Over the next few weeks, things changed, but not in the way she had once tried to force. Some days Daniel came home late. Some nights they barely spoke, exhaustion pressing between them. But other times he reached for her just because he wanted to. He planned a weekend away, not because she wished for it, but because he thought they needed it. Their love was no longer dictated by whispered desires. It was raw, imperfect, real. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elena found herself standing at Midnight's stall once more. The stallion lifted his head, ears twitching forward as if sensing something had shifted. I think I finally understand, she murmured, running her hand along his mane. You didn't grant my wishes to control my life. You just reminded me that I needed to see what was already there. Midnight exhaled softly, his warm breath ghosting over her skin. Elena smiled. Thank you. From then on, she still visited Midnight, but not to ask for anything. She rode through the open fields, feeling the wind in her hair, the steady rhythm of hooves against the earth. She found joy in the present, in the simple act of being. And at night, when Daniel pulled her close without needing a reason, she no longer questioned it. Because this love, the one they built with choice, patience, and understanding, was more powerful than any wish could ever be.